Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be talking about tournament characters versus tier list characters. And what I mean by that is there are some characters that in theory are really strong because they have one really strong win condition, their neutral is incredible, or they have an amazing punish game, but maybe their punish game is really technical, and in a tournament setting you might not be always hitting those super hard combos. Maybe you have some pretty linear options as well that you won't be able to get your 0 to death. And then you have characters that are really good in bracket that have really easy and strong win conditions or a basic game plan that allows them to excel. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the best characters in tournament, best characters in theory, and then the best combination of those two. So first off, we have our mid tier, and these are kind of characters that are not really goated in bracket and not really goated in theory. A couple of them have some practicalities, like you have Jigglypuff, for example. In theory, if you hit a bunch of rests, she can do really well, but in practice, it's not even close enough to the level of obtainability, so they're all just going to go in this mid tier. We'll talk about Marth, because he probably should be in there, but I do think he deserves to be in theory. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but these are essentially just characters that aren't very good, and again, there's a couple of them that have some practical uses that could go far in theory. Again, Lucario, if you could live really long, then maybe he has some strong win conditions. Banjo has some really strong stuff, as well as Side B having some good gimmicks, but just in general, these characters aren't quite strong enough to justify putting them in any of the other tiers. So I had an extra tier that I got rid of because it was just kind of confusing and unnecessary, but for what we have in the Goaded and bracket tier, there's kind of three general things we're looking for. One is a really strong win condition, two is a really easy advantage state, and three is a really broken neutral. I think great examples of really strong win conditions are characters like Incineroar and Donkey Kong. You could also kind of compile this into a really easy advantage state, because Incineroar, while you do have to work for his advantage state, you are so scared against playing against him, and I think we're seeing this a lot from SkyJ recently. He will get you in the corner, and Incineroar's buttons in the corner are very strong. In theory, Incineroar should lose most matchups because you should be able to camp him, but he hits you once or twice, you're in the corner, and he kills you at 40. Now he's really good in bracket. That element of fear is something that's definitely a factor as well in bracket that you can't really account for on a tier list. I think Donkey Kong is like that as well. Kazuya is a big factor of that because in theory, again, you just camp out Kazuya, but in bracket it's really hard to do. Then you have characters with just incredibly solid neutral. You have characters like Aegis, you have characters like Palutena. They are just going to probably out neutral you. Wolf as well, they're just better than your character. And then you have characters with some really easy but great punish games. That's a character like Ness, that's a character like Game Watch, that's a character like Falco. I could honestly see Ness being moved up to the Goaded in theory tier, but I think Ness does well enough in bracket that it justifies. Most of the characters in Goaded in theory are really high on tier lists, but you don't really see them doing as well, and a couple of them I will have to explain. Trust me, I have my reasons, but the general idea of Goaded in bracket is that the character isn't incredibly hard to use. They have some really solid options, really strong win conditions for the most part, as well as having a very easy or at least applicable punish game that isn't something that you're going to be messing up all the time in bracket. Now we have the Goaded in theory tier, and these are characters that can be a little bit inconsistent, but they do have some incredibly high peaks, because if you're able to hit all this technical stuff, you can be really strong. I think great example of this are characters like Sheik and Peach. I think they're perfect because those characters are incredibly hard. They have some broken combos. If you are hitting every single Peach and Sheik combo, you are going to be destroying people, but that is much easier said than done. You have to be doing a lot of inputs, you have to be working really hard, and generally you have to be working harder than people. I also think this applies to Bayonetta. In theory, Bayonetta can be killing you at like 0 every single time she hits you, but most of the time it comes down to like 150%. You're struggling to find that back air. So on a tier list, you might be thinking Bayonetta does a ton of damage, she can kill you incredibly early, she has amazing edge guards, but a lot of time in practicality it actually comes down to Bayonetta not being able to get a kill. And again, there are a couple of characters that I think you could argue for being goaded in brackets here. I could see Diddy Kong being moved down there because he has some really simple stuff with Banana, but he also has some incredibly hard stuff with Banana that if you're not landing, sometimes it could be at a huge disadvantage. I also think matchups apply a little bit here. There's some characters in this tier that just have some really bad matchups, so even though in theory they should be doing well because they're a good character, if you run into one of these bad matchups, you have lots of struggles. I think Lucas and Link as well. These are characters with just incredibly high tech ceilings. Without the tech ceilings, they are okay characters, but with it, they are like ridiculous. And PT is a bit of a weird one because in theory, if you're playing the correct Pokemon, you can win every single matchup because there are scarce characters in this game that win against all three Pokemon. Not that they don't exist, there is one or two of them, but if you are playing your Pokemon right, then you definitely can win, but that's a lot of micromanagement. You have to have an expertise on at least 3 of the characters for different matchups, so it's going to be a little bit difficult there. Marth, I mean, he's a pretty easy in theory one because it's just like, in theory, if you hit the tippers, you'll do great, but a lot of the time you're not going to be able to hit the tippers. And a lot of other characters on here, like Mario. Mario, in theory, he hits you once you die, he gets walled out a lot. Meta Knight, he hits you with a dash attack, you die. Well, you know he's going to go for a dash attack, so you just don't get hit by that. Zero Suit, even though her mobility is amazing, she has to work incredibly hard. Wario, you have to get that waft, or you're going to be struggling a lot. You get the general idea of it's like these characters have these really strong tools, but sometimes in bracket they're not as easy to hit because not only are people aware of the tools, sometimes the kill confirms to get those tools can be fairly difficult as well. And I will say, I think I should move Ryu and Ken down just because they're incredibly solid. I don't even know why they were initially, and a couple of these characters again could be moved up and down, but most of the part for in theory, they have one very strong aspect about them, but they're either really hard to hit consistently in tournament, or they're just not good enough to propel them high enough on the tier list. Now, this is just an editor's note because we are going to be talking about the top 10 characters that I think are really good in both theory and in bracket, but I want to talk about a couple characters that get worse in bracket from a tier list and get much better. The ones that are getting much better are DK and Incineroar, and there's a couple characters that get a lot better. I think another example of this could be like a Bowser, maybe even a Cloud, because in theory you edgeguard him, but in bracket it's really hard to. Even Little Mac to an extent because of how scary he is on the ground and how quick he is in his bait and punish game, but Incineroar and Donkey Kong just have such an incredibly strong advantage, especially in Incineroar. Again, we've been seeing it a lot from Skyja. I think I mentioned it already in this video, but you just have such a strong punish game, and with Revenge as well, makes you really, really good. And then you have the gets worse tier. You have characters like Peach, Pikachu, and Sheik. They just have some really, really hard combo games, and if you're not hitting these combos, you're going to be struggling a lot. I think Peach suffers them the most as well, just because her movement in general is much harder than the other characters. You have Palutena, who is incredibly linear, and even though she has some very broken buttons, they're all in the air. She doesn't have a great out of shield game, and a lot of the time she could struggle to get the kill. And then you have Zero Suit as well. Now, Zero Suit's a bit of a tricky one because she's really quick, and kind of like Sonic, it's like, in theory, okay, I should just be able to camp someone, but the difference between Zero Suit and Sonic is when Sonic hits you, you're taking like 40-50%, which isn't a ton, but for his speed, it makes up for it. For Zero Suit, generally, the most you're getting is like maybe a Zair, maybe a back air. She can get up air strings sometimes, which is a saving grace. She has some Nair combos, but the way, I think the Nair nerfs really hurt Zero Suit because it's just not nearly as strong as a tool in neutral now, and now she doesn't really have that super scary X factor of Nair into flip kick because it's just much harder to get. You have to be way more precise, and it's just not as safe as an option to go for, so that's a big hit to her. Obviously, we've been living with that for a while now, and the characters still can have success. Like, all of these characters can still have success, but on a tier list, you should be seeing a lot more of them doing a lot better. Alright, one last edit before we talk about the top 10 best characters. I switched Samus and Kazuya because I do think that Kazuya in theory is also pretty broken. I think Samus is just such a dominant bracket character that I'm going to put her in that Goaded in bracket tier. But now we have this little top 10 here. These are all characters that are very good in theory, as well as being very good in bracket. And the first one I'm going to put is Fox. Now, I don't think that Fox is this low generally, but I'm going to put him here just because he has a couple bad matches. But in theory, if Fox hits you once, you absolutely explode. And in bracket, he has such strong tools. He's incredibly quick. He has some really solid kill confirms that are pretty easy to get, especially if you know what you're looking for. His ledge trapping, while you have to be precise with it, you have a lot of frame data with you, which is super helpful. You have really easy ways to call it jumps. Sometimes he can get edge guarded, but in general, Fox is a really strong character. Again, I do think that he is higher than top 10. I just want to emphasize more characters that have either a stronger theory that can also perform in bracket more. Next up is going to be Brawler, and it's basically the same thing as Fox. I just think that Brawler's recovery is a little bit better, so it gives him a little bit more flexibility there. But Brawler, if he grabs you once, you also explode. And that's another thing that he has over Fox. Fox doesn't have a great grab game. Brawler's grab game is ridiculous. If he's grabbing you at like 0% to like 50, there's a very high chance you die, especially if you have platforms. And if you're on a platform, you are literally just dead. Brawler is insane. He has so many just ridiculous combos, as well as being just very strong in bracket. His neutral game is really quick. He has some very good frame data, has some really strong kill confirms. He's just overall an amazing character. Then next up, I would put Pac-Man. Pac-Man, it's kind of the same thing. Has some really strong zoning tools, has some really strong brawling tools, but the amount of stuff that you can do with his fruits is actually unreal. Like, there's so many insane setups that you have with this character. We've seen T do them in bracket numerous times. That is such strong theory game. And again, there's a lot of characters in here that could do that. In theory, Ice Climbers can do the exact same thing Pac-Man can do, if even better. But what Pac-Man, or what Ice Climbers doesn't have that Pac-Man does, is that he is also very good in bracket because his other tools are still really strong. Not Ice Climbers is necessarily bad in bracket. I think they're actually getting much better, as we're seeing with the rise of Big D and a couple other Ice players. But the general point here here is they're going to be doing very well in bracket because of how strong Pac-Man's basic stuff is, but he still has that amazing X factor. Next up, I want to put Joker. Now, Joker is incredibly broken just because in bracket, his tools are very strong. Gun is really strong, Arsene is incredibly strong, and you could argue that maybe he should be a bit more of a theory character because the amount of work that you have to do with him, but I think that Arsene actually makes it up because even though you have to be incredibly precise, when Arsene comes on, you can play it more of a normal sword-based character where you just hit incredibly hard. It's really easy to make comebacks with that character. If you hit 1 or 2 straight hits with Arsene, you're getting like 40%, a lot of his stuff combos into it, and then of course, Gun is always a factor. Gun will always make Joker relevant any minute. They could nerf entirely all of Joker's kit. They could gut this character except Gun, and he would still at least be a minter, even if everything else sucked because of how broken Gun is. I think it makes him really, really strong in tournament because it's just an incredibly hard duel to deal with, as well as, again, the theory game. Joker has some insane combos. Arsene is, of course, absolutely broken for that comeback factor. It's just overall really strong. Next one is going to be Min Min, and again, you might be able to argue Joker over Min Min, maybe even Pac-Man over Min Min, but Min Min's zoning game is just so strong in bracket. And in theory as well, Min Min has some very potent 0 to deaths. Her edge guarding is the best in the game. She has some of the best ledge trapping in the game. Her option coverage and just option select in general is incredibly broken. She can kill really early. She can gimp literally every character, even the ones with the good recoveries. Even characters like Pikachu, Pac-Man. Min Min is one of the only characters that can consistently contest them off stage with no risk and still get a ledge trap after, which makes her so good in bracket. And in theory, again, I know I'm saying that a lot in this video, in bracket in theory, but you have to draw the comparisons. Of course, in theory, how do you get in versus Min Min? Because she's always going to be applying safe pressure pretty much, and it's really, really hard to break that distance. The next character is going to be Snake. Now, this might even be a little bit low for Snake, and the reason that Snake is so good in bracket is the variety that you can have in his play. I think Snake, maybe besides Steve, has the most variety in this entire game of just the different play styles you can have. You can have an aggressive Snake, you can have a campy Snake, you can have a high-tech Snake, you can have a low-tech Snake. Basically, everything will work just because his basic tools are so strong. He has some of the best tilts in the game. He has one of the best special sets in the game. I'd argue top 5. I could even see arguments for his special set being top 1. Grenade is broken. Nikita's broken. C4 is broken. Cypher is okay, but I think on Snake it allows him to be very good just because the amount of stuff that you have for B reversing. Snake is just overall amazing, and in theory, Snake's theory game goes crazy. Off of one grenade hit, you're seeing Apollo Kage do this now even. He can hit you for like 50%. He can kill you at like 50 off a grenade hit. He can stick you with C4, hit an up tilt sends you up really high, blows you up with C4. There's so much stuff that Snake has access to, and even without this stuff, he still has a frame 1 out. He still has incredible killing. He still has a kill confirm at 170, even though it is a little bit high. Snake is a character that can rack up damage super easily and has no problem getting to these percents. I think Snake is so broken. The amount of stuff you can do with him is unreal, and the amount of ways that you can play his game plan just makes him so hard to fight in bracket. Next up for me is going to be Sonic. Now again, I do think Sonic is higher than this. I think Sonic right now is the best character in the game, assuming Steve is banned, because Steve is definitely the best character in the game, especially with PLGM. But Sonic, in theory, should never get hit. But in bracket, he also never gets hit, but his advantage state is really strong. His mix-up game is incredible. He is probably the best edge guarding in the game because of how Spring works. It's either him, Min Min, Pikachu, or honestly Snake, just because Nikita is broken. But I have Sonic having a strong argument for that because he can just cover the high and the low, which most characters can't do. Even Min Min can't do that. Her edge guarding is just no risk. But Sonic can go low, recover, and easily get up there with the Spring as well. So he's able to cover low, cover high with a hitbox. It's just incredibly broken. His advantage state is ridiculous. And again, in theory, if Sonic ever gets a lead, you cannot win because he'll just camp you, and it's really hard to catch up to him. And we see this in practice a lot as well. And now we have our big three, and I'm just going to put them all in at once because they kind of all cover the same topics. The topic for this, except for Steve, nothing really applies to him. Just know for Steve, everything is good about Steve. But for Kazuya and Rob, it's kind of like, okay, their neutral is a little bit lackluster. They are incredibly fast. They can get camped a little bit, and they're pretty big characters, but they live for a really long time. And if they hit you once, you explode. Rob, in theory, can kill you off essentially every hit he has if he has Gyro, which is why Rob is going to be below Kazuya, because Kazuya doesn't need to have Gyro. He can just Electric Wind Godfist you. I think you guys probably understand the topic at this point. We've already talked about these two characters a ton in tier list videos because in theory they can hit you and kill you in one hit, and in bracket not only can they still do this, but their normal tools are just so strong, especially for Rob. His neutral game plan is just ridiculous, and then Kazu's win condition is probably the strongest out of anyone in the game. I'd even argue over a character like Wario, who's so reliant on Waft. Kazu just having electric wind Godfist as a win condition at all percent literally is just ridiculous. And then of course you have Steve, who just has an entire bag of tricks that I'm not even going to divulge into, but it's not only is he the best in theory because again every hit he kills you, as well as his camping being ridiculous, he's also the best in bracket because these things are very easy to do. His combos that aren't hard still hit you for 60%. His killing is incredible. Steve just kind of has it all. And I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And I'm sorry this video was a little bit unclear, but the TLDR of tournament versus tier list characters, are there certain characters that where they're generally placed on a tier list doesn't really reflect the results at all. Some characters are getting much worse results, some characters are getting much better results. These are all factors of human error, fear, how good their advantage state is, how good their disadvantage state is as well. There's a lot of things that play into it. There are certain characters that just benefit a lot from being in a bracket setting where they are human error. Again, if this is all AI and characters are playing absolutely perfect, then everything, all the Goaded theory characters are going to be the ones succeeding, but that is not the reality that we live in, and that's why you see some of these upsets happen from these really strong low tier players. Again, curious what you guys think. I think there's a couple characters that could be moved up into this top 10 and want to know what you guys think. Again, I know I just said that, but I am generally curious because I think this is a really interesting topic that people don't really talk about. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Sport's been absolutely unreal lately, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.